If you have $10 million in the bank, you might feel like you've officially won the game of financial security. You can buy a dream home, invest in dividend-paying stocks, and never worry about a standard utility bill again. But if you walk onto an airfield and try to buy a brand new private jet with that $10 million, aviation insiders won't applaud your success. They will tell you that you are about to go broke. Because in the world of ultra-high net worth aviation, buying the plane is actually the easy part. The real financial trap begins the second the tires touch the tarmac. A light business jet might cost $5 million on the pre-owned market, but keeping that same aircraft in the sky, parked in a hangar, fully insured and operated by a licensed crew, can easily drain $1.5 million to $3 million out of your liquid cash every single year, whether you fly it for 100 hours or leave it sitting on the runway. Yet, America's wealthiest individuals and top corporations aren't backing away from private aviation. In fact, private jet deliveries and flight hours have hit historic levels across the United States. So why are multi-millionaires and billionaires pouring fortunes into an asset that depreciates like a rock, burns thousands of dollars of jet fuel every hour, and generates zero passive income? The answer isn't just about luxury, champagne, or avoiding airport security lines. It's about a hidden financial calculus involving federal tax codes, opportunity costs, corporate productivity, and a sophisticated financial system that transforms aviation from an outrageous luxury into a strategic business tool. To understand the economics of private jets, you first have to understand how everyday Americans think about money versus how the ultra-wealthy viewed time and capital. For the average American household earning around $75,000 a year, major purchasing decisions revolve around monthly cash flow. You balance the mortgage, the auto loan, insurance payments, and grocery bills. When you buy a vehicle, you calculate its trade-in value down the road and hope it lasts long enough to pay off the loan. In this framework, a private jet looks like total economic madness. It is an asset that loses value the minute you take delivery, consumes fuel at rates that would make a commercial airline CFO cringe, and requires continuous regulatory compliance under Federal Aviation Administration rules that force you to replace multi-thousand-dollar parts based purely on calendar dates, regardless of whether they're worn out. Yet thousands of private aircraft are registered across airports in Texas, Florida, California, and Ohio. Wealthy executives, tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, and private equity partners routinely spend more on a single year of jet maintenance than an average American family will earn in an entire lifetime. The problem facing this tier of wealth isn't surviving month-to-month expenses. It's maximizing the value of limited, non-renewable time while navigating complex tax liabilities and capital efficiency. When your time is mathematically worth $5,000, $10,000, or even $50,000 an hour to a company or portfolio, spending 4 hours in a commercial airport terminal isn't just an inconvenience, it represents a measurable financial loss. At first glance, you might wonder why the financial mechanics of private aviation matter to an average taxpayer or retail investor. The reality is that private aviation sits directly at the intersection of public policy, corporate governance, consumer pricing, and federal tax laws. When a Fortune 500 company buys a $65 million Gulfstream G650, that purchase doesn't happen in a vacuum. It impacts shareholder returns, corporate tax liabilities, and executive compensation structures. The tax incentives that allow corporations and ultra-wealthy individuals to write off private aircraft purchases are written into the exact same United States tax code that governs your mortgage interest deductions and 401k contributions. Furthermore, the private aviation market serves as a leading economic indicator for the broader U.S. economy. When corporate jet usage drops sharply, it often signals that major enterprises are tightening capital expenditures ahead of an economic slowdown. When private flight hours surge, it reflects high corporate deal-making activity, venture capital deployment, and robust private wealth creation. Understanding how the ultra-wealthy navigate aviation economics provides a clear lens into how capital flows through the top tier of the U.S. financial system, and why rules around asset depreciation, tax write-offs, and corporate efficiency operate very differently at the top of the economic pyramid. Private aviation wasn't always an industry driven by Wall Street spreadsheets and complex tax structuring. In the mid-20th century, flying privately was almost exclusively reserved for government officials, military leaders, and a tiny group of industrial barons like Howard Hughes. Early business aircraft, like the Lockheed Jetstar, introduced in the early 1960s, were loud, expensive to operate, and lacked the range for long transcontinental travel. Everything changed in the late 1960s and 1970s with the arrival of dedicated business jet manufacturers like Cessna, Learjet, and Dassault Falcon. Suddenly, corporate executives could fly directly between regional manufacturing facilities and corporate headquarters without relying on commercial airline schedules. However, full ownership remained wildly inefficient for anyone flying under 300 or 400 hours per year. A $1 million aircraft sitting in a hangar for 25 days out of the month was a massive sink of dead capital. The true revolution in private aviation economics occurred in 1986 when an entrepreneur named Richard Santulli founded NetJets and introduced the concept of fractional ownership. Instead of buying an entire $20 million jet, an individual or corporation could buy a 1/16th share of an aircraft, granting them 50 flight hours a year without the operational headache of hiring pilots, managing maintenance, or dealing with hangar leases. This innovation transformed private aviation from a static, highly inefficient physical asset into a flexible financial product. Over the following decades, the market expanded further, with jet cards, charter broker networks, and sophisticated aircraft management companies, creating a multi-layered ecosystem designed to extract maximum utility from multi-million-dollar flying machines. To understand private jet ownership, you have to break down its financial architecture into three distinct layers: acquisition cost, fixed operating costs, and variable operating costs. First is the acquisition cost. Whether buying a pre-owned light jet like a Citation CJ3 for $4 million or a brand new ultra-long-range jet like a Bombardier Global 7500 for over $75 million, buyers rarely pay 100% cash up front. Most aircraft purchases are financed through specialized private bank aviation financing divisions. Loans typically require 15 to 30% down, with terms ranging from 5 to 10 years, tied to short-term benchmark rates like SOFR. Second are the fixed operating costs. These are expenses you pay every single month just to legally own the aeroplane, even if it stays parked inside a hangar and never turns on an engine. Fixed costs include air crew salaries. A primary captain and co-pilot for a mid-sized or heavy jet cost between $250,000 and $400,000 plus annually, plus benefits, training programs, and simulator recertification. Hangar rent, parking space at major regional airports like Teterboro in New Jersey or Van Nuys in California, can cost anywhere from $5,000 to over $20,000 per month. Insurance, hull insurance covering physical damage to the plane, and liability insurance covering passengers and third parties routinely run $30,000 to $100,000 plus per year. Jet A fuel. Burning 200 to 500 gallons at $6 to $9 per gallon means fuel alone costs $1,200 to $4,500 for every single flight hour. Maintenance reserve funds. Turbine engines must undergo costly overhauls every few thousand hours. Owners pay into engine maintenance programs like Rolls-Royce Corporate Care or Honeywell MSP at a rate of $300 to $800 per flight hour to cover future overhauls. Landing and ramp fees. Airports charge fees every time you land or park on their ramp, ranging from $100 at rural airports to thousands at major metropolitan hubs. When you add all three layers together, running a mid-sized business jet for 200 hours a year yields an effective operational cost of $6,000 to $12,000 per hour flown. Let's look at the hard financial figures that govern private aviation in the United States today, backed by market data from industry organizations like the National Business Aviation Association, NBAA, and federal reports. Consider the depreciation curve. A brand new $25 million super mid-sized jet typically loses 30 to 40% of its initial value within the first 5 years of operation. That represents roughly $7.5 million to $10 million in paper loss before factoring in a single gallon of burned fuel. To offset this steep depreciation, buyers heavily rely on U.S. federal tax codes. Under historical tax law revisions, specifically the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, businesses could utilize 100% bonus depreciation under Section 168K in the first year of qualifying business use. While this provision phased down over subsequent years, 80% in 2023, 60% in 2024, 40% in 2025, and 20% in 2026, it allowed corporate buyers to write off millions of dollars against their taxable income immediately upon placing the aircraft in service. For a profitable company or high-earning individual in a top federal and state tax bracket totaling 40% or more, writing off a $10 million aircraft purchase in year one could result in an immediate tax liability reduction of up to $4 million. That single tax mechanism effectively lowers the net entry price of the aircraft, fundamentally altering the math behind the purchase. To see how this works in practice, let's examine a realistic scenario involving an American business owner named Mark. Mark founded an industrial logistics firm headquartered in Ohio that generates $120 million in revenue and $18 million in taxable net income. His company operates distribution centers scattered across smaller manufacturing towns in Indiana, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina, locations poorly served by major commercial airlines. If Mark flies commercial, visiting 3 facilities in a single week requires driving to Cleveland or Columbus, flying through major airline hubs like Charlotte or Chicago, renting cars, and staying in hotels for 4 full days. His executive team loses hundreds of hours in travel time every year. Instead, Mark's company purchases a pre-owned 2018 Embraer Phenom 300 Lightjet for $9 million. Nearly $2 million in cash leaves the business every year. How does Mark justify this to his board? First, Mark logs that 90% of the flight hours are strict business trips. Utilizing tax depreciation schedules, the business writes off a significant portion of the aircraft's value against its $18 million profit. At a combined federal and state corporate tax rate of 30%, that deduction saves the company over $1 million in income tax obligations in the primary year alone. Second, Mark uses the jet as a time machine. He can leave headquarters at 7 a.m., inspect a facility in rural Iowa by 9:30 a.m., fly to South Carolina for an afternoon client meeting, and be back home with his family in Ohio for dinner at 6:30 p.m. The jet doesn't make Mark money directly. It acts as an efficiency multiplier that compresses 4 days of travel into 11 hours, allowing his executive team to manage more locations with fewer high-salaried leaders. Here is the part that most people miss about how the ultra-wealthy structure aviation assets. They rarely let an owned jet sit idle when they aren't using it. When a private jet stays parked in a hangar, it loses money every second. To neutralize those brutal fixed operating costs, smart owners place their privately owned aircraft onto a commercial air carrier's certificate under FAA Part 135 Charter Management Agreements. Here is how the charter offsets work. You purchase the aircraft and use it for your personal or business travel for, say, 120 hours a year. During the remaining 200 days when you are at home or in the office, you allow your management company to rent the aircraft out to external charter clients for $6,000 to $9,000 per flight hour. The charter revenue pays for fuel, landing fees, pilot hours, and contributes toward your annual fixed hangar and insurance expenses. By leveraging Part 135 charter revenue, an owner can effectively subsidize their fixed costs, lowering their net cost per hour of personal flight time down significantly. However, there is a crucial legal trade-off enforced by the IRS. To claim primary business tax deductions on an aircraft, at least 50% of the total flight hours must be dedicated to legitimate business use rather than personal leisure or third-party chartering. Balancing personal travel, business necessity, charter income, and IRS compliance requires a team of aviation accountants and tax attorneys who monitor flight logs hour by hour. In the complex financial engine of private aviation, capital moves quickly between different stakeholders, creating clear winners and losers across the market spectrum. The winners: aircraft manufacturers and service providers, companies like Gulfstream, Bombardier, Textron Aviation, and General Dynamics earn lucrative margins not just selling aircraft, but selling high-margin replacement parts, avionics upgrades, and long-term maintenance contracts. Charter management companies and brokers, entities that manage fleets, collect steady administrative retainer fees while passing operational risks directly back to the aircraft owner. Ultra-high net worth executives, business leaders gain unprecedented time efficiency, security, privacy, and schedule flexibility, allowing them to close deals faster and oversee distributed business operations effectively. Secondary regional airports. Local airports across suburban and rural America thrive on fuel sales, landing fees, and hangar leases generated by general aviation. The losers. Unprepared wealthy buyers. Individuals who buy an aircraft based on their liquid net worth without projecting long-term operational cash flows often end up forced into distressed sales after 24 to 36 months of staggering maintenance bills. Commercial airline passengers. Private aviation absorbs significant air traffic control resources and airport slot capacity in high-density corridors like New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, occasionally contributing to regional airspace congestion. General tax base balance. Broad tax incentives that allow rapid write-offs for private business jets frequently face criticism from policy analysts who argue these rules shift a higher relative tax burden onto standard wage-earning consumers. The private aviation industry is entering one of the most disruptive periods in its history, driven by three major economic pressures. Scenario A: shifting tax regulations and increased scrutiny. As federal budget deficits remain elevated, lawmakers and tax agencies are placing tighter scrutiny on corporate aircraft usage. The IRS has announced increased audits targeting personal flights taken on corporate-owned aircraft. Furthermore, as bonus depreciation percentages continue their scheduled phase-down under existing statutory timelines, the initial tax umbrella that insulated buyers will shrink, forcing buyers to evaluate aircraft strictly on operational utility rather than upfront tax savings. Scenario B, environmental regulation and sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. Environmental compliance costs are mounting rapidly. Jet A fuel emissions face growing regulatory pressure in both Europe and North America. The industry is pivoting towards sustainable aviation fuel, which can drop carbon emissions by up to 80% over its life cycle. However, SAF currently carries a price premium of 2 to 4 times traditional jet fuel, which will drive variable operating costs per hour significantly higher over the coming decade.
Scenario C, the rise of fractional and subscription models. As full ownership costs escalate, the market is shifting heavily toward fractional ownership models and digital charter platforms. Newer buyers are choosing to skip the headaches of full ownership entirely, opting for jet cards, flight hour subscriptions, and fractional shares that offer guaranteed access without balance sheet exposure or long-term maintenance liability. While most Americans will never buy or charter a Gulfstream, the financial lessons embedded in private aviation economics apply directly to everyday financial decision-making. Evaluate total cost of ownership, not just purchase price. Whether buying an aircraft, a car, or a home, the sticker price represents only a fraction of your long-term commitment. Always model maintenance, insurance, depreciation, and recurring operational fees before committing capital. Understand the difference between wealth-building and wealth-consuming assets. A private jet is a luxury operational tool, not an investment asset. Recognizing which purchases generate passive yield versus which ones consume ongoing maintenance cash flow is fundamental to long-term wealth preservation. Leverage the time value of money. The ultra-wealthy use private aviation because they value time above marginal capital. Assess your own productivity. Where can you invest money in your daily life, whether through automation, outsourcing chores, or commuting efficiency, to buy back high-value time? Analyze tax structures legally and strategically. Learn how business expenses, asset depreciation, and tax deductions work within the law to optimize your own small business or personal tax filings responsibly.
At the end of the day, private jet ownership isn't a secret wealth-building strategy. It is an expensive, highly complex and resource-intensive operational tool. The ultra-wealthy aren't buying jets because the aircraft themselves make them rich. They buy them because the time savings, schedule control, and tax structures allow them to protect and scale the business empires that generate their wealth in the first place. Because understanding the economy isn't just about knowing what happens on Wall Street. It's about understanding how capital, tax policy, and time value shape the decisions of the world's most powerful market players. If you want more clear, data-driven explanations of how America's economy and money systems actually work, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for our next deep dive.